Welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program, Assemblyman Mike Norris. Mike Norris represents the 144th Assembly District in Western New York State. That includes Erie and Niagara counties. We want to thank you folks for joining us all across Western New York. Mike Norris, we're going to spend our time today talking about what's going on here in Albany, the state capital. It's budget time, right? And if we remember how this plays out, the governor gives a budget proposal at the beginning of the calendar year, and then the legislature looks that over and tries to figure it out based on what the governor's department heads and commissioners say about it. And then the Assembly and the Senate have now each passed their own budget proposals. So there's three different budget proposals, one from the governor, one from the Assembly, one from the Senate, all out there for public consumption. And this is where the real horse trading begins, right?
Yes, and last week here in Albany, they had, like you mentioned, the one house bills. The Assembly and the Senate both put forth their proposal to the tune of $13 billion additional dollars over the proposed governor's plan. Now, I want to just put this in perspective too. I've mentioned it before on this program, but it's very important for the constituents back home to understand. Over the last 5 years, since the downstate-driven majorities have taken over both the Senate and the Assembly and the governor, one-party rule, the budget has increased to the tune of $64 billion. That is more than 36 states' budgets total in the state of New York, so in the United States of America, total. I can remember when I worked for one of my mentors, Assemblyman Dave Seaman, back in 1995. The budget back then was only $55 billion. So you think about that. Right now, the budget is about $230 billion in the last fiscal year. The spending is completely out of control over the past several decades, particularly in the last 5 years, as we've had one-party rule. And I know, I'm very confident, my constituents know, that I have voted against and been loud against this reckless spending for the last 5 years. I voted against every single budget bill because I understand that we cannot afford this type of spending and keep it sustainable here. People are walking away from the city of New York. They're packing up their U-Hauls and they are heading to Florida and Texas and other places in the South where they don't have as much taxation. They don't have as much burdensome regulations on businesses, on farms. And it's not because of the weather. People love being here with the four seasons and they're used to it. I mean, one day it's 60 degrees, one day it's 20 degrees, one day it's windy, one day it's bright sun. We're used to it. And many people enjoy the different seasons. They can't afford to live here, Mike. That's the reason why they continue to walk away. And the outmigration is a serious issue because we lead the nation in outmigration of any other state in the union. And that's the reason why. So with that being said, I do want to focus right now on the priorities, though, about our future.
Yes. Let me spend 1 minute though on before we get off on what kind of spending and what might be in a final budget once all that horse trading that I mentioned earlier is said and done. It's hard to believe it was just 30 years ago you're talking about, and the budget was $55 billion, and now it's up to a proposal from the state assembly of almost $250 billion. And that gets you into some rarefied air because you could say $250 billion is the same as $250 billion. And I never imagined we'd be using the word trillion in terms of a New York State budget, but $250 billion, what's it going to be, another 30 years before we hit the $1 trillion mark? I mean, and I said this to somebody just recently, that the budget's going up like this, and that person said to me, and how much better is our state government and the services that we're getting for that much more money, right?
Well, exactly right. I mean, you look at right now, like State Liquor Authority, for example, that is hard for them to process the applications that are going through. And I can tell you the contact is very helpful in my district to help when someone contacts my office. So I always encourage people to do that if you're having trouble with a state agency. But the volume, they continue to have reduced the number of people working there. It's not streamlined very well. And that's just one example of where even the governor has recognized this, and she has mentioned this on many occasions, that there needs to be a revamping, reimagination of how the State Liquor Authority does their business. When you look at this just overall, we cannot continue to afford to spend this much money in the state of New York. And that is when you look at where we should actually be examining to, the Medicaid budget is about $100 billion. Now, to put that in perspective, I mean, we offer the Cadillac plan of all plans. When the federal government is involved with the Medicaid services, there are certain basic requirements that are required. But when you look at the actual chart of all the additional services that are provided beyond the basic, we lead the nation. Well, that costs money, and it's from the taxpayers of the state of New York to do that. Another thing I've mentioned many times, we need to make sure if you are able-bodied that you get back to work, that you're not on a cycle of dependency for 5, 10, 15, 30 years on the system. We need to revamp. If you do go out and work and you are under a particular threshold, maybe we fill the donut hole in that case, but we're not spending the whole boat because they're out and they're working. I'm not saying that about individuals who need assistance. For example, the developmentally disabled. I'm a strong advocate to make sure we properly fund those areas. We look at independent living centers for those types of individuals and try to figure out what the best way. Many of these parents are very fearful about the day that they will pass on and they'll leave their children to where, to what care. So that's something that I continue to work on. So again, I think we just need to look at all of these areas, continue to rid out fraud and waste and duplication of services in those types of areas, and also focus on the priorities of the people of Western New York.
Let's talk
Yes.
about those priorities now. Let me get you there, because you mentioned the Medicaid program and how, I mean, that's almost half of the 240 something billion dollars that the Assembly is proposing, 100 billion on the Medicaid program. But that leaves you with a lot of other spending too that we can talk about today as we get into what the priorities are for Western New York. I'll let you lay those out now. When you talk to the people back home, when you go to various events or maybe just run into them at the grocery store, wherever it may be, what are you hearing from them? What's important in the minds of the people you represent in terms of services that New York State provides?
I think it's very simple. It's education, it's infrastructure, it's public safety, and it's learn to work to make sure we get individuals properly trained. That falls under the education component. Those are the top priorities that the people of my district want. I'm going to give you a perfect example in education. The governor put language in to actually repeal the home hardness clause on foundation aid. And what that does is it actually had a reduction to many rural districts and suburban districts in my area, in the 144th district, significant cuts, while others, the big cities, for example, are getting more funding. I called immediately for the full restoration of foundation aid. I joined Leader Barkley in our conference at a press conference as soon as this announcement was made by the governor, urging that they fully restore foundation aid because, quite frankly, this rolls back down onto our property taxpayers as well, and to our students and to our teachers, to make sure we are investing in our future. And I will commend the Assembly majority in this particular instance. They heard the calls of the minority conference and others, and they have put the full language in the budget. Now I call upon the governor to make sure that she recognizes too that we need to fully fund our foundation aid formula after the 3 ways are discussed and the final budget is implemented. This is very, very important to the people of Western New York.
In one of
I
our
happen
recent
to,
programs, you talked about helping out volunteer firefighters, and that was going to take some state monies to do. Is that something that's showing up in the legislature's versions of their one-house budget bills?
well, I can tell you the training stipends, which we fought so hard for, is also in the one house and in the governor's proposal. So that's a good step. However, something that I've been working very hard with, President Ed Tace of FASNY, a local constituent of mine, but also honored to be the president of FASNY across the entire state, the Firefighters Association of the state of New York. We want to increase the income tax credit, which has been stagnant at $200 for a long time. That needs to be increased to make sure we can to continue to recruit and retain our volunteer firefighters, who, by the way, save $3.8 billion across the state of New York each and every year. Unfortunately, that did not make it into the one House Assembly budget, but I will continue to advocate to the governor and to the speaker the importance of making sure that gets in there, because it's very, very important. I want to mention.
I've only got about a minute left, so I want to get you to, you mentioned transportation as a big issue. I know people that I talk to are constantly complaining about the roads and the potholes and how things need to be fixed up. Is there going to be more money for highway improvements?
Well, I certainly hope so, because under Governor Cuomo, for 9 years, CHIPS funding remained flat. And then last year there was a bump, but then the governor this year took a step backwards and actually cut it by $60 million. I happen to be privileged to serve as the ranking member of the Assembly Transportation Committee. Also been selected by Leader Barkley to be on the Transportation Budget Committee. And I'm going to go to that meeting this week and be very loud, like I have in years past, to make sure that we fund properly our infrastructure. Because basically what has happened is that by having it remain flat or a reduction, with the cost of inflation of supplies between 40 and 60%, the people of the Western New York particularly, and our local municipalities, is seeing a reduction, seeing a cut. So to put that in perspective, when you take a look at the budget going up $64 billion over the last 5 years, it has not gone up the same percentage for our local roads, our bridges, and our culverts. That's very important to me and the people of my district. I will continue, like I have been since I've gotten to the Assembly, to be loud on this issue, because it's very, very important. And I'm going to tell you one more thing. Where can they find that request of a $250 million? They can find it from the illegal alien line, where this year in the state of New York, in our budget, $2.4 billion are going to be allocated to illegal aliens who are getting hotel rooms, who are getting debit cards and cell phones and health care, who have come here improperly. I have no problem if people come to our country legally, are vetted properly for health and safety, but we should not be spending $2.4 billion on illegals who are coming here improperly, when our citizens need their roads, their bridges, they need education funding, and they need to make sure that we provide the services and help our volunteer fire service. I will continue to be a leader and a champion on these issues for the people of Western New York.
Well, this is all supposed to be figured out by the beginning of the month of April. We will be in touch with you, Mike Norris, and see if deadlines are met this year. Well, time will tell, and we will be in touch with you and see how many of these various proposals find their way into place in the final New York State budget. In the meantime, if you folks want to know how you can reach out to your representative, there's that QR code that you see right there on the screen. That's one way. You can you just scan that with your cell phone and get yourself right to Mike Norris's website here at the Assembly. You can also contact the office in Williamsville. You can do that by dialing 839-4691, or probably the easiest way to be in direct touch with him if you want to talk about any of the issues that we've been talking about today. Drop an email to norris@nyassembly.gov. Assemblyman Mike Norris, always a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and we want to thank you folks too for spending your time with us, and we'll hope to see you all again soon for our next Assembly Update.